There is a subtle, shivering lie hidden in the fabric of your wardrobe. We have been conditioned to believe that your $500 mountaineering jacket is the pinnacle of human protection, a masterpiece of engineering, designed to conquer the elements. But historical records from Norway's harshest winters show something unsettling. While many modern systems fail under extreme cold, traditional systems from the past often held firm. And the same logic applies to what we wear. A 13th century shepherd, standing on a frozen, rain-lashed moor, in nothing but a hand-spun woolen tunic, was often drier, warmer, and more biologically resilient than a modern hiker in a so-called breathable synthetic shell. Today, we view medieval clothing as primitive, heavy, scratchy, damp, but in our obsession with speed and cheap mass production, we traded away a sophisticated biological layering system for what is, when you strip away the marketing, essentially a high-performance plastic bag. And to understand why your modern gear leaves you chilled the moment you stop moving, we must unearth the buried wisdom of living clothing. We must look at the physics of the thermal battery and the forgotten engineering of a garment that doesn't just block the cold, but works with your body to generate its own heat. Now, pick up any modern winter coat and read the label. You will likely see a list of petroleum products: polyester, nylon, elastan. These are not traditional textiles. They are refined oil, spun into thin plastic threads. Much like industrial food products replace real bread for the sake of profit, these materials were designed for the assembly line, not the human body. The industry optimized these jackets for raw value and lightweight marketing, but they ignored the most critical factor in survival: the moisture paradox. Your body is a constant radiator of vapor. Even in deep winter, you are still transpiring. You are still releasing moisture. But inside a synthetic shell, this moisture has nowhere to go. It hits the cold plastic wall of your coat, because synthetic fibers are hydrophobic, meaning they reject water instead of working with it. And the vapor condenses into liquid water. In the trade, this is known as the steamer trunk effect. You aren't being kept warm. You are being steamed. And the moment you cease physical activity, that trapped dampness, clinging to your skin like an icy sheath, begins pulling heat away from your core at an alarming rate. We have become a fragile species, living in icebox houses, wearing clothing that requires constant movement just to stay functional. We traded the thermal mass of natural fibers for the convenience of fast fashion. And in doing so, we created a wardrobe that is on life support, dependent on global supply chains and chemical coatings that begin to fail the moment they leave the factory. To the medieval mind, a garment was not a seasonal fashion statement. It was an investment in survival. Their approach wasn't about making do with limited resources. It was deliberate. It was engineering, perfected over generations. 1. The living immune system. Medieval sheep were not the fragile, standardized animals of modern monocultures. They were robust, mountain-hardy breeds. Their wool wasn't just hair. It was a complex biological defense system. Unlike modern industrial scouring, which strips wool with harsh chemicals, medieval weavers preserved the lanolin. Lanolin is a natural wax. It is antimicrobial, and it acts like a built-in immune system for the garment. When you wore a greasy wool cloak in a downpour, the rain didn't soak into the fibers. It beaded and rolled off the surface, just as it did on the living animal. The garment felt heavy, a reassuring, scented weight on the shoulders, but it remained functional for a lifetime. 2. The fulling process. Much like the engineering of trencher bread, dense, absorbent, enduring. Medieval workers fulled their wool. They beat the woven cloth in water with fuller's earth for hours, sometimes days, until the fibers shrank and matted together. This created wadmal, a fabric so dense that the wind could not penetrate it, yet so porous that body vapor could still escape. For centuries, this knowledge didn't need a marketing department. It survived because it worked. Now imagine a medieval traveler walking through a damp English forest in late November. The air is thick with mist, the kind that penetrates modern waterproof membranes within an hour. But for the traveler in fulled wool, the experience is different. The outer layer of his cloak might become heavy with dampness, yet the heat remains trapped inside the thermal mass of the dense inner fibers. 3. The scaled fiber. Under a microscope, a wool fiber is a marvel of ancient physics. It consists of overlapping scales, much like the tongue and groove joints of a Scandinavian log cabin. When wool gets wet, these scales open and trap microscopic air pockets. Even when the garment is 30% saturated with water, it continues to insulate. Your synthetic jacket, once wet, loses its structure and its ability to hold heat instantly. The medieval peasant didn't need a breathable membrane because he wore a thermal battery. He understood that heat needs mass. His clothing bank stored body heat during work and slowly radiated it back during rest, much like a masonry heater keeps a home warm. Long after the fire has gone out, it is easy to look at the scarred and cracked tools of the past and see only poverty. We look at a thick woolen tunic, and we see rough peasant food for the skin. But when we apply the lens of modern physics to these forgotten methods, the perspective shifts. The question isn't whether medieval clothing was primitive. The question is why we abandoned a system that worked with nature for one that requires us to fight it with brute force energy. The superiority of ancestral fibers isn't just a matter of nostalgia. It is a matter of thermodynamics. Research from institutions like the University of Innsbruck, the same team that validated the efficiency of medieval log cabins, has explored a phenomenon called the heat of sorption. When wool fibers absorb moisture from your sweat or from the atmosphere, a subtle but powerful chemical reaction occurs. The water molecules become bound to the internal structure of the wool, and in that binding process, energy is released as heat. Think of what this means for a person caught in a sudden winter storm. At the exact moment the environment becomes wet and cold, the most dangerous conditions for hypothermia, a real wool garment begins to generate its own heat. It is a living response to the environment. A modern polyester jacket is biologically inert. It produces nothing. It is a dead material that only slows the inevitable loss of your own warmth. Furthermore, just as the Corleywood bread process replaced 24 hours of biology with a cocktail of chemicals, the synthetic clothing industry replaced the resilience of wool with chemical DWR coatings. These coatings are not only toxic, they also act like thermal bridges. Once compromised, they allow cold to seep in. The medieval system relied on active diffusion, meaning the wool pulled moisture into its core, kept the skin dry, and used the energy from that moisture to keep the wearer warm. It was a complete food system for the skin, nothing wasted, everything serving a purpose. We do not need to live in a medieval hut to benefit from this wisdom, but we must learn to recognize real food. For our wardrobe, look for greasy or raw wool. Most wool in modern shops is superwash. That means it has been bathed in acid to strip the scales, and then coated in plastic to prevent shrinking. This destroys the heat of sorption. Seek out boiled wool or traditional lopi yarns that retain their natural structure. Follow the 3-layer system. Use a linen base to manage moisture, a heavy wool mid-layer for thermal mass, and a foldable outer layer to act as your airtight seal. And trust the air balm. Stop washing your wool. Much like the stinky troughs of medieval bakeries were home to beneficial bacteria, wool has its own way of staying clean. Lanolin is naturally antimicrobial. Simply hanging your garment in the wind allows it to breathe and reset. The shift from wool to plastic was never about making you warmer. It was about speed, profit, and the industrialization of the human experience. They traded your biological resilience for a shelf-stable product that looks like protection, but behaves like an inflammatory toxin for your thermal health. The medieval shepherd, wrapped in his dark, dense cloak, wasn't a victim of a brutal world. He was a master of a system perfected over 5 millennia. He didn't depend on a constant drip of electricity or petroleum to survive the winter. He depended on the land, the animal, and a deep respect for the engineering of the natural world. As we move into an era where our grids are more unstable and our environment more unpredictable, we are beginning to realize something uncomfortable. Our high-tech lives are built on thin foundations. Reclaiming real wool is more than a fashion choice. It is a step towards self-sufficiency. It is an act of unearthing the buried wisdom that the modern world would rather you forget. We have spent decades fighting against physics with furnaces and plastic. It is time to stop fighting and start remembering. It is time to put on the staff of life and walk back into the cold with the confidence of our ancestors. Choosing a modern synthetic jacket over a medieval wool cloak is like choosing an electric space heater over a massive masonry stove. The heater gives you a quick blast of warmth that vanishes the second the power fails, leaving you in a cold icebox. But the wool, like the stone stove, is a thermal battery. It takes time to warm, but it holds that heat in its very bones, guarding you long after the storm has begun.